Morning all. There was a very interesting game yesterday in the Gashimov Memorial. Fabiano Caruana was playing white against Magnus Carlsen. Caruana had lost earlier in the year in the Zurich tournament to Magnus in the classical time control, but actually beat Magnus in the rapid, and previously has had a relatively good score against Magnus compared to most other grandmasters. So let's see what happened in this game. I would just like to do this as a brief commentary, actually, with maybe a more detailed video later on. So Caruana played e4, and we have actually Magnus playing the Berlin wall system. So this was popularized in the Kramnik against Kasparov Brain Games World Championship match. So a very solid opening choice from Magnus. Black doesn't mind the early exchange of queens. It gets the bishop pair. There's some structural damage, but it's meant to be okay for black and very popular in recent times. So H3 H6. Now usually knight c3 is played here, but rook d1 check was played. King e8, knight c3, bishop d7. So far it looks fairly solid. Bishop f4. So that pawn can be quite dangerous to liberate with e6 at some point. Rook d8, knight e4. The knight looks quite nice there centrally. White has a small edge at the moment. Bishop e7. This knight can be kicked here, and it is with g4. Knight h4, knight takes, bishop takes, and now the king comes up to g2. Bishop e6. And it looks as though bishop d5 could be an annoying pin on the knight. This diagonal is blunted with f3. And now knight c5 might be quite interesting for white. This is stopped with b6. b3. This will help blunt this bishop and also react with c4 on c5. So c5, if black is about to dissolve the double pawns, this is now stopped. So white's got a comfortable position, a small edge here at move 19. Rook d7, and now white doesn't mind the dark square bishops being exchanged off. Magnus refuses that. He could take this, but he just retreats the bishop. And now a pair of rooks come off. So far a bit of a dull game, as you'd expect from this Berlin wall system. You know, Magnus was very content with the draw, it seems, and doesn't mind these exchanges. Okay, white's got a little bit of an edge though. Knight c3, and it looks as though this is a bit annoying. Knight d5, and you might think, well, if black tries to, you know, it looks terrible to play c6 in some way. Knight stops knight d5, rook d1. This is quite comfortable for white here. What is black actually doing? Say king d8. Knight e4, there's a big hole on d6. So black doesn't want to be totally radical about stopping knight d5. Magnus actually just plays here king d8. Although this might not be technically the best. Yeah, engine suggests bishop d8 here or h5. So king d8. The ambition is to get the king over here and then rook d8. Knight d5. At the moment the king can't move without dropping at e7, so rook e8, rook d1, and now that plan is carried out here, of just trying to play, you know, the king away from this seemingly dangerous d file. But in this position, it seems, in this particular position now, it seems c6 might be a good idea here. Technically, in the circumstance, even though it weakens d6, this might be a kind of this seems reasonable here in this particular position. But believe it or not, Magnus actually played king c8, and technically there's an issue with this move. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. So what did Caruana play here? You might want to pause the video. Okay, it might seem quite an easy tactic, but yeah, this bishop that was blocked in, this e6 is quite dangerous if taking here. So Magnus, he didn't take it. If he took here, e6 check, and this is like quite crushing actually. If king c8, we just take this, winning the rook. If king d8, rook takes d7, rook c7. This is horrible. This is absolutely horrible for Magnus. This position is like falling to bits. So he just has to ignore this knight takes c7. He did that with rook d8. He's still got the bishop pair, but white's taken a chunk out of black, packed black. Knight d5, and it seems it's a horrible knight on d5. Rook e8 protecting the bishop again. On the other hand, you could argue, well, it was only one of the double pawns, so was it such a big deal? Well, d6 has been slightly weakened by the absence of that c pawn. So let's see, bishop e1, manoeuvring the bishop to c3 seems an improvement for the bishop actually, because then also with rook e1, f4, these pawns could also try and go forward later. Bishop d8, bishop c3, g6 was played, king g3, bringing the king up, b5, quite energetic, trying to improve the bishops. Maybe if black keeps solid, I guess white's going to make progress anyway, gradually, but Magnus is maybe trying to show that these bishops are adequate compensation for the pawn. C takes b5, bishop takes b5, so that bishop is more activated now. Pardon me. Knight e3, and the c4 square is being used now potentially, so knight c4 is on the cards. Rook e6, f4, these pawns are also quite dangerous. Rook a6, black is trying to keep active. Rook d2. Now this seems quite radical here at move 33, although white does seem to have a promising position with f5 at some point. At the moment though, maybe some preparation moves, gaining a bit of space with h4 and a4 is also interesting, but Magnus actually played h5, and this encourages actually white to have two dangerous pawns here. White just takes on h5, even though he's potentially opened up his king on this g file, so there's a bit of a risk for white's king safety, but he is potentially now getting two dangerous pawns. The thing is here, let's have a quick look at f5. That I'm not sure that quite works here because of bishop g5. This is annoying. This would be annoying. The bishops actually would be having a great time here, and definitely Magnus will be back in the game. So Caruana has to tread carefully. He actually plays knight f5 to start off with. That d6 square with the absence of the c7 pawn is important. Check king h2, bishop c6, and it starts to look a bit dangerous with some coordination here. If only this bishop can help, like on this diagonal, that would be really dangerous. But check for the moment. And now the pawns do go forward, f5. So rook g8, keeping that king a bit insecure. f6, blunting the bishop away from that g5 square. So black was potentially now playing bishop g5 as well. That was a serious threat actually for bishop f4. Very, very serious stuff. So f6, closing up the bishop for the moment. Bishop b6, and it doesn't. The f7 pawn is on here, but this starts to look dangerous for c4 and bishop g1. So for the moment, on move 40, just to reach time control perhaps, knight c4 was played. It doesn't lose white's advantage. e6 is also quite dangerous here on the cards for this f pawn. Just as an example, h4, e6. If taking here, white could take f7, rook f2, and then there's bishop g7 to follow. So, okay, so it doesn't lose the advantage or anything. Knight c4, rook e8 was played. Now knight d6, rook g8, and now with greater calculation and more time to spend, I think knight takes f7 was played more confidently here. So c4 threatens a mate in 1 that needs to be addressed urgently, and Fabiano comes up with h4, just giving his king h3. As long as g2 is controlled, it's not mating at the moment, and white's got these very dangerous pawns. Rook g4 was played. So okay, this needs to be a kind of positional sacrifice to try and get these pawns going, but black also has this diagonal, so it needs some precision calculation, because at the moment though the knight is holding the e5 square, so e6 is actually technically possible here without losing to bishop c7. Bishop c7 wasn't played. If bishop c7, bishop actually not, maybe not bishop e5, there's c3. Maybe more accurate is actually knight e5 here, and this should be very, very good for white. These pawns are a menace. So after e6, Magnus tries bishop e3. So bishop f4 check looks very dangerous indeed. So here bishop e5 check controls that diagonal, taking away f4 from this bishop after the king moves. Rook d8 check was played now. This is a very, very good move. King b7, and here knight d6 looks like a good forcing move to use, but also what white played is also very strong. Bishop g3, so simple and strong, keeping white's pawn's very, very dangerous. This c pawn looks quite dangerous though as well for c3, and that's actually used now by Magnus with c3, and it's protected by the bishop here, so it seems very, very dangerous pawn to try and stop. Rook b8 check was chosen to try and get behind that pawn, so after king a6, rook c8. You might wonder, well, why not here king b6? On king b6 this doesn't quite work. Knight e5 hitting c6 and the rook. So what does, this is actually terrible for black. What does black actually do in this position? There's no time to push the pawn. c2 we just take here, and then we take the pawn. I think we can just safely just take the pawn. So that's why king b6 is not on the cards here. So the bishop goes to d5. This dangerous pawn is taken, hitting the bishop. And white is now also threatening e7 if given the chance. So these pawns are getting really, really dangerous. If bishop b6, not e7 straight away actually, because the bishop takes f7, but knight g5 and then e7 is now on the cards, and this would be terminal. So actually bishop b6 is out of the question. Where else can the bishop go? If bishop d2, then rook d3 embarrasses both bishops. If taking here, then rook d6 check wins that bishop. So this is really annoying that black is actually losing material here. So Magnus tried bishop d4, and we have rook d3. So white is now threatening knight g5 just to get this pawn going with e7. And you might think, well, okay, here, what's wrong with bishop takes e6? Again, knight g5, and this pawn is really dangerous. So hitting that bishop there, where does the bishop go? If bishop d5, then f7, and white's going to be winning that bishop. Black would have to give up the bishop. It looks totally lost. Piece down. So this is a terrible position now. These pawns are an absolute menace. Magnus tries rook e4. Now it looks as though the natural knight g5, I think this is keeping white one move away from a blunder almost. Knight g5 wouldn't be that hot, but still white's okay apparently. But white doesn't want to go into this rook e2 check. That's a total mess compared to what white can play here to try and keep black's counterplay under control. White just plays rook d2, very calm. So still has got this knight g5 idea. So black is in serious trouble. Magnus Carlsen is in serious trouble without much counterplay, rather strangely. So rook takes e6 was played, and after knight g5, black is actually just going a piece down, so the 2 pawns are being used here to win a piece. Here Magnus Carlsen resigned. So that was the brief gist of the game. I'll try and cover the game in more detail at some point later, but yeah, the brief gist seems to be suggesting that Magnus seems to follow a pre-prepared plan, rather without looking at the implications of knight takes c7 rather strangely. The ugly looking move c6 seems more relevant in this position than king c8, just to stop this horrible coordination happening here. This bishop is actually quite dangerous. So this nabbed a pawn, and later it seems these pawns are just going to get quite dangerous, but Magnus kind of went for white's king with h5 on that g file, but it wasn't quite enough. Very carefully played by Fabiano to shut down the dark square bishop here from this g5 square. Very, very carefully played, and then very carefully calculated that the c3 pawn wouldn't be a total disaster, or these diagonals, this diagonal here. So that c3 pawn became another dangerous thing to factor in, but here it was stopped with this check, and here with the idea of knight e5, so this pawn not quite making it here, so putting Magnus in severe trouble to white's pawns. And now the issue became about losing a piece, actually, to try and stop the pawns. Rook d2 stopped black's counterplay with rook e2, and then Magnus was losing a piece. He resigned here. So an astonishing loss for Magnus. He hasn't lost for a long, long time, and it just shows that you know, even the best of the best, the world champion, can occasionally lose a game. So it keeps Magnus away from 2900 for the moment, but a lot of people do think Magnus could still get over 2900 or to 2900 this year. So okay, but it also shows that Fabiano's style might be quite dangerous for Magnus, might be one style which Magnus could have trouble dealing with. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.